movement for over 50 years. And he just has a wonderful long resume, which if I told you all about it today, it would take the whole hour to do that. So I'm just going to tell you that he was an evolutionist who became a creationist. He was a biology professor and taught evolution for many years, and then became a creationist. And so now he refutes evolution. He has many, many books that he has written. He's the founder and the curator of the Creation Adventures Museum in Arcadia, Florida, where he takes children on adventures to dig up fossils and to understand fossils. He and his wife Mary run that museum. He's the author of over 15 books. He has spoken and debated worldwide on creation. He's been a speaker with both the Institute of Creation Research and Answers in Genesis. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Parker today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it was a real joy for me to be a part of the service this morning as well, and to meet the pastor a little bit ahead of time, and to turn out to give me the title for the talk today. And so Judy asked, the leaders of the group here what topic they would like to talk on, and the one that came up was age of the earth and ecology, an interesting combination, and I'll try to get. And as the pastor said this morning in the service, the usual idea is that, the Bible teaches young earth, 6-day creation, a few thousand years ago, but then he made a common mistake. I don't mean it in the wrong way, but the popular idea is that the Bible says that, but science tells us, that the earth is, millions and billions of years old and so on. I said, no, the conflict isn't between the Bible telling us about a young earth, it's evolution that tells us about an old earth. Science agrees with the Bible. And so this morning I'd like to share with you some unexpected, perhaps, evidence of a young earth that you're going to hear on TV, nature programs, things like that, where they're supposed to support an old earth, and they really don't. In fact, lots of time, belief in endless time, creates all kinds of problems in understanding the earth and its history. And I found that out, as Judy mentioned. I've been teaching evolution, preaching evolution really, for years, until a Bible study led by a chemist in a Reformed church over in Pennsylvania, over a 3-year period, kicking and screaming, finally brought me into living fellowship with the living Lord. But, the biology questions I was able to solve myself, but I still wondered, what to do about all this so-called evidence for great age. Well, about that time, the Lord did one of the nicest things He's ever done for me. A grant from the National Science Foundation to go back and earn a doctorate in biology with a minor in geology, an emphasis on age dating, fossils, and things like that. It's actually the richest I've ever been in my life. I would like to thank you, the American taxpayer, for your generous support.
You're welcome.
And it's interesting that even though my professors, believed and taught evolution, what they actually told me made it hard to continue believing in evolution. It made it much easier to believe the biblical record of Earth history. So one of the key courses right off, was geophysics. Well, that's where we studied firsthand the radioactive decay dating methods and so on. And so the prof explained all of these things, uranium, lead, potassium, argon, rubidium, and strontium. That's not one you hear as much as uranium dating or carbon dating. I'll come to that too. But it's supposed to be the very best of the methods. And the prof assigned us a problem as graduate students in geophysics to calculate the age of a rock based on 2 sets of data from rubidium and strontium. And so, as a dutiful student, I'd calculate the age of this rock, and then I'll use the other set of data, calculate the age of the same rock And one of my dates was nearly 10 times bigger than the other one. And I thought, oh no, just like my checkbook, one arithmetic mistake after another. So I did it again and again and again, and I couldn't get the, I mean, it was one rock, it should have had the same age. I couldn't get the two methods to agree. I asked my fellow students as we walk into class the next day, slinking in class, did you get that answer? Did you get that date to come out? No, I couldn't get it. We sit down, you know, thinking the professor's going to be mad at us and give us extra homework. Instead, he kind of chuckled and said, no, I just wanted to show you the method doesn't always work. And this was supposedly the best of the methods. This has been used at Grand Canyon. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. It has been my pleasure over the years to lead 40 week-long hiking trips through the canyon, a couple of raft trips. And at the upper end of the raft trip, there's a rock unit you see there that's carbonaceous basalt, you know, have rubidium strontium date of 1.07 billion years. 10 days later, we cruise over lava falls at the far end of Grand Canyon, and that had actually been blocked off by the eruption of volcanoes on the top of the canyon, the north rim, witnessed by Indians. When Indians watched these volcanoes go off from a distance, mind you, and they knew about this. The lava poured over the side, blocked off the Colorado River, backed up, you know, and finally it became so powerful it broke through and just left crumbled lava, hence lava falls. But notice the date. Now remember, the Indians saw the lava come out of the volcanoes on the top, and when you date a rock, you know, you can't say, well, it was old lava underground. No, that's not what you're dating. It's, we get, same as carbon-14, you date the time the rock formed. So when you can't date a molten rock, everything's all mixed together all the time. So it came out that what you're dating is when did that lava solidify that came out of these volcanoes viewed by some of my ancestors, the American Indians. Well, the rubidium strontium date is 1.34 billion years for the recently observed lava flow. For the lava flow buried down low in the canyon in Tilted Rock, it's only 1.7 billion. Notice if you took the radioactive dates literally, that would prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Grand Canyon formed upside down. Yeah. And I choose to believe there's something wrong with the dating method. The canyon never was upside down. And then, follow that up, one time I did lots and lots of creation evolution debates in America and 4 other continents over a period of years. And it was one at Portland State out in Oregon. And so I like to talk first and get it over with. And my general creation talk was using DNA as an evidence for creation, using mutation in Darwin's law of nature, called natural selection euphemistically, as an evidence of the corruption of the created order, and then fossils as an evidence of the Great Flood. Okay, billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. And then most of it was all in the science, but at the end it gave me a chance to summarize it, pointing toward the salvation, restoration of life in Jesus Christ. So that's what I did at Portland State. And my professor got up, and you know, I never know what to expect, but this was really nice. He said, well, that was very interesting. I enjoyed listening to what Dr. Parker had to say, and I'm not going to say anything about his what he said about DNA. I can understand how you can see that as an evidence of creation, and I'm not going to say anything about Darwin's mechanism for evolution. Everybody knows mutations create all kinds of disasters. And says, what? And I'm thinking, he's going to come over, shake my hand, and ask if he can work in creation science. But it didn't work out that way. Points his finger at all those students, but no one is leaving this room until I prove to you that the earth is billions of years old. Mm-hmm. Then he said, of course, not carbon-14, that has a short half-life, not uranium and lead, that's the one people hear about most. But lead doesn't dissolve very much in water, and uranium dissolves real easily in water. And so if you had a rock that was half uranium atoms, half lead atoms, you'd say, well, that's a half-life gold. And for uranium, that's 4.5 billion years. So if you found a rock like that, you'd say, wow, 4.5 billion years old. The other thing, if you wanted to get it older, put it in a lead-lined sink using lead-lined gloves, turn on the faucet. And by the next morning, you could make it 8 billion years old. And so it washes away uranium much faster than it does the lead, which makes it look like uranium has disappeared and made more lead, makes it artificially look old. There's no way. And we know every rock on Earth has had water flowing through it, a lot of water, in the case of sedimentary rocks and so on. And it really, that was what he was going to hinge his argument, not on uranium lead, but rubidium and strontium. And it took him his whole hour to explain the assumptions that went into that method. And that's the date that was given in geophysics class, that you could get the wrong dates on the same rock, dates that didn't agree. And so this was, fairly astonishing to me that he picked that. And not only that, but look at what you do get. And so this is a chart from a really good book. Dr. Henry Morris, his son, Dr. John Morris, did a great book on the flood that shows some of these dates. And ICR sponsored a whole research project over an 8-year period with 10 scientists. And this is the way you actually measure. There's a Hualapai basalt that's supposed to be, according to evolutionary beliefs, expected measure. But looks like the titles are the opposite. What they expected would have been 1.6 million years. Sorry about the reversal of the titles. But it was actually observed to form 200 years ago in the Mount Etna basalt from the volcano over in Europe. Remember, you're dating the time that it solidifies. They expected it to be 25 million years old, 2,100 years old, documented historically. And another Mount Etna basalt, a more recent eruption, thought to be, dated 35 million years old, but it was really only 29 million years old. And you can see Mount St. Helens, I'll show you a slide of that later, but I'll save that for later. So these things, it's common knowledge among experts. Oh, here it is right here. Okay. My wife and I had the privilege of flying up Mount St. Helens over the lip of that volcanic crater, and the bump in the middle of this kind of semi-solidified lava was glowing red at the time. And I thought to myself, boy, if I get a picture now, this could be really awesome. If this volcano would go off, I'd be, and I thought, well, maybe not. Okay, so, but it's dated by actual observation. Everybody knew it was 20 years old. Remember, dating how long since it solidified? And scientists from around the world were photographing this. This is the most photographed, understood scientific observation of what really happens in the geological world, highly witnessed, no doubts about it, and so on. And yet when they did a potassium argon date on it, that 20-year-old lava flow gave a date of 2.4 million years. Now, how dense do you have to be to realize there's something wrong with the method? Belief in great age never originated from anybody's measurement of anything. It started with Charles Lyell, a lawyer, okay, used to twisting observations to, come to certain conclusions. He had a friend in Canada that was measured, had lived there a long time in Niagara Falls, which is continually cutting back in this limestone cliff. And so he asked his friend, well, how fast is it cutting? Well, it turned out it was actually about 6 feet a year. But he said, well, that's way too fast. So he said he was probably wrong. It's probably 1 foot a year. He just made up a different number because 6 feet would have put it at the time of, shortly after Noah's flood, 1 foot would put it beyond the biblical time limit. And that's what he was looking for. He wanted to make up stories about an older Earth. And he's the one that, Darwin took his book on his voyage. They were also personal friends. And he didn't attack the Bible in all of his treatises on an old Earth that mismatched the evidence. But he said, this way, people won't know that what you're doing is really replacing the Bible. and you can get them to accept your evidence before they realize what the real significance of it is. Here's a more interesting one, I guess. Lucy. Okay, for years Lucy was hailed, as a missing link between apes and man. Oh, they've come up with some doozies over the years. All of them have proven false. The took the longest for Piltdown Man. Fooled experts in science from around the world for over 40 years. Finally, somebody said, maybe we ought to take a look at the fossil itself. These were just the published reports. I've been to Piltdown in England, a little village with a pub with a picture of Piltdown Man winking at the tourists. And when they re-examined it, they noticed that these bones were stained to make them look older. And it was actually the skull cap of a human being and the jaw of an ape with a teeth filed down to make them look semi-ape, semi-human. It was actually a trick. Somebody was trying to embarrass an evolutionist enemy of his. But all the evolutionists fell for it, so he could never admit it without ruining his own career. And some of the fossils buried with it were brought in from Africa. There was one shaped to look like a little English cricket bat. It was not, a tricky, difficult discovery to expose. And when they finally looked at it 40 years later, one scientist said the file marks on the teeth sprang immediately to the eye. Well, that was in the late 1950s. I was doing speaking in Sweden in 1982 and got to do some fossil hunting. But the museum at the fossil site still had Piltdown Man listed, as one of the ancestors of people. Well, Lucy's been discredited by scientists over and over and over again. Evolutionary scientists, not just creation scientists. But so here I'll just mention the date. The one who, quote, discovered or made up the story of Lucy, Donald Johanson, wanted to show that Lucy was older than any of the other candidates, so he could be the famous one. He was competing with the Leakey family. And so the first date he got was a little less than 3 million years of potassium argon. So he was so disappointed and so on. So somebody else did a date, 3.5 million years. And Johanson says, I'll take it, I'll take it. Why? Why would that be any better than the first date that was wrong? The bones were all wrong. To make the pelvis fit the human evolution model, they had to chop the pelvis into pieces, glue it back together again to make it fit the this. And he actually says that in his own TV program on Nova. And so, the dating, though, was just all over the place. That's the favorite of anthropologists, this potassium argon date, because it's like using a rubber band to measure the width of the lines of the type. You can stretch your measuring rod to get whatever answer you want. I was one the Portland State guy would not mention. And so it was written up, this argument over dates was written up in a science journal as Lucy, the trouble with dating an older woman. And you decide for yourself if that really meant, okay? And so the question is, why would anybody with any respect for science at all, even a little teeny respect for science, be intrigued by radioactive decay dating? Well, this may surprise you. The answer is because it works. On paper. Okay, it seems to be logical. You think it ought to work, and so it's not as foolish as I might have made it sound up to this point. But you can compare it crudely with an hourglass. So here's an hourglass, and these are used, timing board games and things like that. And so the sand in the top of the hourglass would represent the parent element, like uranium changing actually through 14 steps in the lead. And then the little narrow thing the sand filters through would represent the decay rate. How fast is the sand flowing from the top to the bottom, or how fast is the parent element, the radioactive element, changing into the stable daughter element? Well, if it was a narrow neck, it'd be really slow rate of decay. If it was a wide neck, the sand would flow through very fast. It would be a very short half-life. How long it take half of it to get through. And so it looks like, well, an hourglass works. And radioactive decay is just changing the parent element at a measured rate into the daughter element. Shouldn't that work as well? Well, it would, except for the real world problems. And so the problem is, number one, they have no idea where the parent element came from or how it formed. There are theories, at least, for forming the elements up to about 26, but uranium's number 92. And there's no present physical theory for getting those. And all of the theories that are proposed make a variety of products along the way. And there's a widespread belief among evolutionists that there's lots of extinct radiation. Elements that were produced that have now decayed away, but they've left a signature in surplus heat flow. In other words, nobody knows what was in the top of the hourglass. You know, you may have come into some kids, you know, playing a game, and they've got a little sand hourglass. They're measuring the time, but you know, it's half full. I see you guys have been at it for a 10-minute timer. You guys have been at this for 5 minutes. And then I said, no, it was lying on its side when we found it. We just now turned it over. We're getting ready to start the game. You just have no way of knowing the decay rate. They used to say, and it was just a lie. I mean, nobody that knew anything about radiation would say this, but they said the decay rate is absolutely constant. There's nothing that can affect its decay rate. Well, I've spoken in Hiroshima or Hiroshima, Japan. Believe me, they think there are things that can change the decay rate. And it doesn't have to be that extreme. That's what they do at nuclear power plants. And so in their, they have to use rods to, measure and absorb the extra, make sure it doesn't get too hot, and so on. And this happens in nature. There's a uranium ore bed in Gabon, Africa, that's near what they call critical mass. If the ions were more concentrated together, the neutrons given off during the decay would break down other atoms nearby and speed up decay rapidly. That would not be a place I'd want to buy long-term investment in real estate. And they do watch that and so on. And decay rate can be affected by lots of different things. And then the daughter element problem. Uranium changes to lead over 14 steps. Along the way, it's radon-222. Was there ever a radon-222 scare out here? There was in Florida. It's a radioactive gas produced in changing uranium to lead. And they don't usually tell you this in the brochures, but there's a lot of uranium ore under South Florida. And the Everglades, we're just a little north of the Everglades, it's a great place to catch fish. And they have little teeny signs like this with a thumbtack and a piece of paper saying, fishing's okay, but don't eat more than 1 or 2 fish a week out of here because they're got radiation poisoning. So, anyway, so as radon seeps up, the uranium's way down there, but the radium is an inert gas, so it works right up through that, works right through concrete, works right into buildings. And some of you, it wasn't that long ago, where they had sick building syndrome, in an effort to make sure that, we were saving every ounce of energy possible. They made school buildings and stuff, so airtight. You wouldn't waste any air conditioning, you wouldn't waste anything else. But radon was seeping into the building and, giving radiation sickness potentially to all the students. And they actually finally had to crack a few windows and, loosen up the doors a little bit, to make sure that stuff didn't build up inside. And so nothing but problems. By the way, okay, this is in nature. Some of you have probably had an iPad. Some stress tests where they introduce technetium, a radioactive element, into the blood as a tracer. And you say, boy, as shoddy as this stuff sounds. Well, in this case, they know how much they had to start with because they made up the solution. When I was doing my doctoral work, I used radioactive calcium-45 to trace the flow of food in phloem, the food-conducting elements in plants. But I knew how much I started with, and at the local time, it decays at a rate that can be reasonably measured, and it's soft enough and it's used small enough, you can develop a picture of the pathway of flow through plants the radiation absorbed would, develop the X-ray film. So if you have it as a medical treatment, that does not have all of the problems that trying to use it as dating in nature does. So don't get too concerned about that at any rate. Okay. Let's see. I think maybe I'm just going to skip this one because I want to give you guys some time too. So I'll just summarize it in the words of William Stansfield, who's the author of a book called The Science of Evolution, published by Macmillan, one of the most respected scientific publishers in the world. And the title of the book is The Science of Evolution. He teaches at Caltech, and I got to teach his class one time. He was on, off on some conference or so, and they had a creation speaker, me in town, and I was free, so the universe let me speak to the students, and they said, obviously he's an evolutionist, he wrote this evolution textbook, but he says he's real open and honest in class. He doesn't jump on students that have different ideas and all, he discusses it with them. And this is his writing, and this is not new, this has been known for a very long time. And after explaining the method and the problems, the same way I just did, textbook style, he summarizes it this way. This is an evolutionist, an expert in the field, publishing a respected book by a respected publisher. It's obvious. Well, it's another one I would change that to, it should be obvious. Because to most people, it's not, it is really obvious, but most people don't know that. It should be obvious that radiometric techniques may not be the absolute dating methods they are claimed to be. That's what they call them, absolute dating methods, as opposed to, the growth rates of trees and stuff like that. They'll be varied by climate, mineral nutrition, wind, water, a whole bunch of things. This is supposed to be absolute and unshakable. And it's worse than tree ring dating. Okay, but may not be the absolute dating methods that they are claimed to be. That's a soft statement. Age estimates on a given stratum by different radiometric methods. Okay, what are we talking about here? Okay, I'm telling you the method, it's in serious error. Was it 5% off, 10% off, 20% off? How bad can it be? And every method has some flexibility. It says different radiometric methods are often quite different, sometimes by hundreds of millions of years. Now you would think, if you had a GPS, they told you to turn left and straight off a cliff, you'd say that's more than a minor problem. I mean, what is it? 99.999999999%. And now they're quibbling over whether the dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago or 66 million years ago. And they're using a method that can't tell the difference between yesterday and the Genesis flood. It's just nonsense. One of the leading creationists, Andrew Snelling with AIG, worked in radioactive dating labs in Australia for years. It was he did a lot more than that, but he was also the one tasked with finding rocks that could be used to do radioactive dating dates for helping find the rock formation. And as he did that, he noticed that there just wasn't any pattern, wasn't any agreement. And so he told the president of the company about it, we really can't date these rocks. They're just all over the place. And a few months later, he saw an article published on the data that the rocks that he'd collected, all lined up in evolutionary order. He went to his boss and, that's not right. I'm the one that collected those samples. I'm the one that did the original way. He said, you just picked the ones you wanted. That's not right. So, you still want to work here, do you? It was a lie. He knew it was a lie, but it served his purposes. There's a lot of that going on. It's incredible. Well, let's turn to something a lot more reliable. Now, this may surprise you. There is a dating method that can give you some interesting and somewhat reliable results. Carbon-14. Now, you might think, oh, really? Why is that better than these others? Well, number one, it has a short half-life, so you can actually measure it fairly accurately in a lab. By short, I mean 5,730 years. which is way less than 4.5 billion years, okay? And we know where it comes from, and we know how it forms. So carbon-14 is formed by high-energy bombardment of nitrogen-14 in the Earth's upper atmosphere. Of course, our Earth is about 78% nitrogen. Nitrogen, you know, has an atomic weight of 14, 7 protons, 7 neutrons, and high-energy particles from outer space hitting nitrogen can change one of the protons into a neutron, knock out an electron. And so now you've still got a total weight of 14 protons and neutrons, but now it's 6 protons, 8 neutrons. Well, that's not nitrogen anymore, that's carbon. And of course, it reacts with oxygen to form radioactive carbon dioxide, and we know what percentage that is compared to regular carbon dioxide. It mixes in the Earth's atmosphere. And so living things, plants takes it in, people, animals eat plants, so they absorb this carbon-14. It's a very small percentage of all the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but there it is, okay? And it's just a beta decay. It's not a really powerful radioactive decay, so it's, and the amount's so small, it's not really harmful, but it is interesting. Now, what do you need? Okay, well, right now, we're all breathing in stuff, breathing out carbon dioxide. We're hoping to get out in time to have lunch. Taking some more radioactive carbon dioxide from food and so on, but in small areas. And so you don't date it when things are alive because it's in flux. You know, it depends on where you are and what you've eaten recently, etc. But when an organism dies, it quits trading carbon dioxide. A dead plant or dead animal is not going to be breathing anymore. So whatever carbon-14 it had in it when it died, that's all it's ever going to have. It's not going to get any more, usually. And then it's going to start breaking down. 5,730-year half-life. We can measure how much carbon-14 is in the Earth's atmosphere today. And if that number was, that you found in a dead plant or animal, was half that, you'd say, well, it's been dead half of the lifetime of carbon-14. It's been dead about 5,730 years, which means it died, you know, sometime around the flood. Well, it may took a little too long for the flood. When did that, you know? Well, it turns out there's some variation, you know, in carbon dioxide, and we picked it up at the tree rings, the bristlecone pine forest way up in the White Mountains in California. I've taken students up there on field trips, and there's this big billboard. You know, the bristlecone pines are supposed to be the oldest large living things on Earth. And some of them go right, guess what the oldest ones are? 43, 44, 45, right in that 1,000 years old. What else happened about that time on the Earth? Noah's flood. And you look at Methuselah, is the name given to the oldest bristlecone pine. And it's got one of those 43, 4,400 year dates to it. But it doesn't look like it's going to die. I mean, I'm nowhere near 4,300, in spite of what I look like, but there's plenty of evidence that I'm not going to last too much longer. But this is still thriving, still growing. Why aren't there 5,000-year-old bristlecone pines? 5,500, 6,500. Well, because what? The Earth was flooded. You know, the trees were sheared off. And so as Noah's getting out of the ark on Ararat, sprouts of bristlecone pines are showing up in the mountains of California, and the redwoods get almost that old too. It's really exciting to think they're just happening, you know, right at the time of the flood. Now, if you're asking evolution, no, we've got bristlecone pines that go back thousands of years, and redwoods go back. No, they don't. The ones they date on the live redwoods, they go back to the beginning of the flood. You know, just a little over 4,000 years. Then they start trying to match. Okay, so they'll take a little bore that pulls out about a pencil's worth of wood, and you can see all these rings and count them. And then you can do that with a fossil, try to line it up, and they say, you know, it's like ballistics, telling whether this bullet came from that gun or the other. The only thing is, it's not like ballistics at all. If you take a you know, pencil sliver from this side of a redwood or a bristlecone pine, from this side at the same level, from that side, you'll get radically different dates. And so trees grow different, the ring size, ring shape, ring count, and so it varies with the insect infestation, shade, mineral nutrition, storms that have been through the area, and so on. Now you can try to pretend that you can line these things up, and you can publish papers on it, and you can deceive a lot of people, but you can't say you've done anything remotely resembling objective science. You're just trying to back up a hypothesis that's failed every test ever given it. You know, Darwin is unique among the publishers. He's the only person I know of that's been 100% wrong. Okay? Takes a special talent. Also takes a special salesmanship. And that was Huxley that was the salesman for all that. And like I said, when we were at the bristlecone pine forest, they had this big sign, this is where carbon-14 was proven wrong. But it's not wrong, it's just in need of correction. And what they found out is that carbon-14 was more right than the tree ring datings had been. And so they saw that as you took tree rings back and carbon-14 ring, they'd agree, and then after a while they began to disagree. And sure enough, Stansfield knew about that. And so this is the same author I told you that made the comment about the hundreds of millions of years of error in the long ages. And he knew that the carbon-14 dates, again, which are reliable, repeatable, based on testable assumptions of recent history, and he mentions creationists. He doesn't, put a snide remark in front of it. His creation argument that since carbon-14 has not yet reached its equilibrium rate, the age of the atmosphere must be less than 20,000 years, actually a lot closer to 10, the age of the Earth, not the flood. It's possible. Now, how does he answer that? By the way, I guess there's a slide missing, so I have to tell you this. At one point I was going to say carbon-14 builds up in the atmosphere, and so if you imagine a rain barrel, so here's a big wooden barrel, and you begin given the job of holding the garden hose and filling up this rain barrel. And so the pay's not bad, so you go ahead and turn on the hose and look in there, it's an eighth full, it's a quarter full, it's a third full, a third full, a third full. What's going on? Then you notice your feet are wet. And so you get to a certain point and the water starts leaking out. That's the way it is with carbon-14. The atmosphere is like a big barrel for holding carbon-14. It forms by high energy bombardment. It leaks out by radioactive decay. So that's what he's talking about here. And it hasn't reached that. Once it got to the balance point, then that would be your ground marker for doing carbon-14 ages. But it's not there yet. So you have to make a correction for that, and the tree ring showed that. And so he knows that too. Creationists argue since it hasn't, how long would it take to reach that balance point? Libby knew that, the one who invented the carbon-14 method, although he got the half-life wrong. He did realize it builds up in the atmosphere. And so he said, well, how long would that take? The answer is about 30,000 years. And Libby, the inventor of the method, of course, was an evolutionist, but didn't have to be, of course, but he was. Said, well, everybody knows the Earth's way older than that, so it must be in balance. And that's what was discovered later on. Wait a minute, it's not in balance. You have to correct for the fact it's still building up in the atmosphere. The barrel hasn't got to that one-third, one-third, one-third level yet. So you have to make a correction. That was what the bristlecone pine forest showed. So he says carbon-14 hasn't yet reached the starting point. In other words, saturation stays the same year after year. The age of the Earth must be less than 20,000 years because it would reach that point at a maximum of 30,000. It's possible. Now look at his why. How does he explain that as an evolutionist? It's possible that a greater concentration of water vapor existed prior to in an evolution textbook published by an evolutionist, by Macmillan, biblical flood with the B capitalized. There are not many Christian writings that capitalize B in biblical, I still do. Biblical flood, his parenthesis, I didn't put that in there, presumably about 5,000 years ago. better dating than many compromising theologians would suggest. And that would make sense. And that's it. So he gives me a choice. So here I am, taking a group of creation students up to the Bristlecone Pine Forest, and Stansfield's giving me a choice. I can either believe that the earth is less than 20,000 years old, or that there was a biblical flood about 5,000 years ago. What do I say? I'll take it. Both of them will do just fine. And when I spoke in his class to his students, they told me that he's like that in class. He's more than happy to discuss things with you. He really believes in the old earth, at least at the present time. But he believes in being fair and honest with his students. And so carbon-14 is a real ally. And creationists at Institute for Creation Research, some of my best friends, years ago, and by the way, the premier conference was in Denver. I guess it was in San Diego, but that was local. The premier conference outside San Diego was in Denver. And they announced I can never remember whether it was 10 scientists for an 8-year project or 8 scientists for a 10-year project, but either way, they made this kind of announcement, and they looked for carbon-14 where no evolutionists had gone before. Okay, because the evolutionist was, well, it's too old. Why use carbon-14? Well, I said, because I'm a creationist. I want to see if it's there. I'm also a scientist. I want to know. I don't want to just make my assumptions, rule out my search for evidence. How many samples? Well, I guess I gave that one away. How many fossil samples suitable for carbon-14, in other words, it had carbon in it, gave dates in a few thousand years? And the answer is every single one of them. And it didn't matter whether it was up here in so-called Cenozoic, in the middle, the Mesozoic, the cold dinosaur era, or down here in the Paleozoic. The ages were about the same no matter where the fossil was found in the geologic column. The age was higher than a creationist would expect. It was around about 11,000 average, but for good reasons. The Earth's atmosphere was a terrific upheaval. At the time of the flood, there was fountains of the great deep bursting forth and all this kind of stuff that would have reset the carbon clock. So, of course, 11 to an evolutionist, 11,000, 5,000 is the same thing. They're both 0 on the uranium clock. And so this is really kind of neat. But there's one more I want to share with you. And I hope, that you know about this. Okay, so this, now it's, let's see, time moves a lot faster than I do. Okay, so that was around about 2005 or 6, the initial discovery. Jack Horner, leads the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman, Montana. He was a science expert for the Jurassic Park films. And took a display around the country, explaining how they made the Jurassic Park film. I was spoken at the Lutheran School of Beautiful. No, that wasn't beautiful. That was, which was a one-up where I spoke to the elementary school.
Oh, Beautiful Savior in Broomfield.
It was?
Beautiful Savior in Broomfield was where he spoke.
Okay. Oh, that was right then. And so, talk to the kids about some of this stuff about dinosaurs. And of course, it's all about dinosaurs in the Bible. They were with me for all the way. And, he had this tour about T-Rex, and he actually said that they had to cheat in the movie. The T-Rex is, chasing a truck like this, running after it, standing on hind legs, looking around, scanning stuff. He said, the Jeep could have got away from them in second gear, and it was okay. And the T-Rex walked around hunched over, down near the ground with these big teeth, just ripping and slashing into pumpkins, watermelons, things of that nature. Well, that was kind of exciting. But he found probably the 5th or 6th fairly complete T-Rex skeleton. You'd think there were tens of thousands all over the earth. There are tens of thousands in museums, but they're all replicas. Well, best case, they're replicas of the ones that were really found. And so he found this real one, got high in the Rockies of western Montana, a real rough territory. They couldn't get trucks in. They'd already hired a helicopter to bring out the specimen. They got a big team together to excavate it, including Mary Schweitzer, a former forensic scientist that wanted to go into paleontology so the bodies didn't smell as bad, I guess. And she was part of the team and helped excavate T-Rex leg bone. Well, my wife and I and some friends of ours have done the same thing with a family of mammoths down in Peace River near our museum. And of course, when you do something like that, you don't just pick up the bone. You know, you expose it and then you clear around it, and then you splint it, you know, with some wrap stuff around it, and splint it with tree branches or 2x4s, depending on the size of the bone. Wrap it in plaster so when you pick it up, you know, it won't fall apart, crumble in your hand, you lose all that data. Well, that's what they did with this T-Rex specimen. But when the T-Rex leg bone, when the helicopter came to lift it up, couldn't lift it, too heavy. Well, now what are you going to do? You can't get a truck up there, so you either got to hire a bigger, much more expensive helicopter. But then somebody said, well, it's already wrapped up in this plastic jacket. We can carefully cut it in half, you know, mark it, and then put it back together in lab. Seal the ends, put it back together in lab. So that's what they did. Now this is a question, and if you know the answer to this question, this is the one time you could be in a class and yell at the top of your lungs. They cut open this T-Rex leg bone, and they were sure it was 68 million years old if it was today, because all the fossils around it were 68 million years old. It must have been 68 million years old. Cut this leg bone in half. What did they find inside?
Soft tissue. Soft tissue.
What was that?
Soft tissue.
Yeah, there you go. A little louder, please.
Soft tissue.
Okay, there. Soft tissue. In fact, soft, squishy tissue. Here's the T-Rex in the new pose, the planted ear down near the ground pose, and nobody got in his way when he was reading through those water bodies. Here's what they found inside that leg bone. Red. That's not added. Red, squishy bone marrow. That's the same as us, by the way. Our red blood cells, you know, formed inside the hollow bones, legs, arms, ribs, and so on. Red, squishy bone marrow. And there were blood vessels in there with red blood cells still in them. Now, our red blood cells don't have a nucleus in them. They're just 280 million molecules of hemoglobin in a sac. But lots of animals, including dinosaurs, reptiles in general, they actually have, you know, here's a blood vessel in this squishy mass. This will be pulled out of this. Here's your red blood cell. Here it is close up. That little dark dot is the DNA in the nucleus. You tell the kids that, oh, we can clone dinosaurs. We've got dinosaur DNA. What's the only thing that can read dinosaur DNA in the correct order to make a dinosaur? A dinosaur mom, okay. So we still got to find that, but that's pretty exciting. And Mary Schweitzer was on 60 Minutes one time, and she had a little block of this T-Rex leg bone. And, you know, she grabbed one of the blood vessels with a pair of tweezers, and the camera zoomed in. She pulled that blood vessel up, stretch, let it go, snapped right back. Way more snappable than my blood vessels. I used to tell students, you know, when you get older, you'll do this, and your skin will just, you know, you let go, and it just sort of falls over. I still got some snap left. And, you know, there's no way this has been decomposing or something like that, because how in the world did it get saved? The answer is, it was hermetically sealed. And so the outside of the leg bone was mineralized so thoroughly, so quickly, that the inside was insulated from bacteria, fungi, things like that, and maintained even through the vagaries of a Montana high winter, you know, high altitude winter. So and preserved for us to see. God does that, you know, a lot of times. Save something just special. You thought you had the answer? Here, take a look at this. Someday, my hope is, I'll speak at a church or a school, or even a park downtown, and they'll say, what did they find in the T-Rex place? And the whole group will have blood, fresh blood, stretchable blood vessels, red, squishy bone marrow. But, you know, it hasn't happened yet. There was some homeschool group, it's about 2/3 of them yelled it out. It's got ear splitting, and I was really happy to have my ears for that one. Keep this in mind. And the evolutionists, of course, they're scientists, and scientists then change their ideas to fit the evidence, right? They don't change the evidence to fit their ideas. That's true of scientists. It's nothing close to the truth of evolutionists. When they saw this, they did everything in their power to exercise Romans 1:18, to suppress the truth. They did not want this getting out there. They thought if people ever found out that you have fresh blood in the T-Rex, they'd quit believing in millions of years, because those two together is just stupid. Okay, so they said, well, they wrote in professional journals articles, well, this is just bacterial slime, well, it's just a fungal growth. The scientists who wrote the article never looked at it. How can you get an article published in a science journal, a refereed science journal, without looking at the evidence? The evolutionists are not playing the science game. They're playing the Romans 1:18 suppression of the truth game, and they're doing good at it. They have suppressed an enormous amount of truth. And now what have they done? Oops, okay. You're not waving, okay. Why would they do that? Because evolution can't stand scientific challenge. Even Darwin got off a plane one time for a creation-evolution debate. The radio announcer shoves a microphone in front of me and says, what do you think about Darwin? And I said, I think Darwin was about fossils. I said, Darwin was exactly right about fossils. Oh, she said, excuse me, I thought you were the creationist debater. I said, I am the creationist debater. Now I had her thoroughly confused, which was my object. And so she had to ask, you're a creationist and you think Darwin was right? I said, you bet. When it came to fossils, his chapter was called Difficulties of the Theory. His subhead said, the first deepest buried fossils are amazingly complex. How can that be? And they just call it the Cambrian explosion and say, isn't that interesting? Yeah, it is. And it completely falsifies any hope for evolution. And then it got to the missing links. Isn't that funny? Everybody knows, associates missing links with Darwin. And so Darwin's theory was that animals and plants slowly changed into each other in a progressive manner through lots of little teeny steps. How many of those have been found? Not one. And so the evidence is missing. And that's stimulated not a lot of scientific, but it stimulated a lot of glory hunting. Okay, I want to find the first missing link. I want to be the one that proves Darwin was right. And so people went all over the world making up stories about missing links, and so on. And each one of them got disproven in turn and so on. But how could W.R. Thompson wrote an introduction to the centenary edition, 100th anniversary edition of Darwin's Origin of Species. Well, he was asked to write it. And he actually said he was surprised that anybody would ask him to write it. He was a very well-known scientist, but he wasn't really that keen on Darwin. And so he described Darwin's theory. This is supposed to be honoring Darwin for a century of grand science. And he's thinking missing links, complex beginnings, variation within kind, complexity at the beginning, decline in size of variety, everything, the exact opposite of everything Darwin taught. And so he said, thus, speaking of Darwin's legacy, thus are engendered those fragile towers of hypotheses based on hypotheses, in which fact and fiction intermingle in inextricable confusion. Oh, I like that sentence. The confusion is the legacy. And well, if you want to thank Darwin, well, actually, this is kind of derogatory to Monday morning quarterbacks, so they're a notch ahead. The games are, of course, on Sunday, okay, and then on there are winners and losers. By the way, in Darwinism, that's all there is. There are winners and losers. There's no right and wrong. There's no good or bad. There's just winners and losers. Is that having any effect on our society today? Oh, wow. Is that having an effect? Is that having an effect on our children? It is, unless you're teaching them right, and unless the church is supporting, which I think it's doing. By the way, I was thrilled to be a part of the service tonight. But, okay. What do you get on Monday? The games are played, there were winners and losers. Now, what do the experts do? Well, it's a survival game. Who survived? Who scored the most points? Who was the winner in a struggle for survival? By the way, that's what survival of the fittest means. The fittest are not the best adapted. Adaptation is a different concept of business. The fittest are the ones that made the most points, that left the most offspring to the next generation, got their score into the record book. Okay, and so what they do is, okay, now they start, regardless of what they thought before the game, now you have these scholars, pointing out, well, I think this team lost because the quarterback's father had just died. It was just tugging at his heart. He just couldn't focus on the game. Or wife left him, or there was a big bickering, or the guy's got a negotiation deal that fell through. They come up with all these survival stories of why this team survived and scored the most points than the other team. And they also, and of course you know it's a fact because, when they say struggle of survival, what's the proof? Well, it's surviving, isn't it? They say that. You can really get that. Of course it's right. There it is, surviving. By the way, it is right. It's a kind of what I call a truism, a circular argument of tautology. Survival of the fittest. Who are the fittest? The ones that survive. And so survival of the fittest is survival of the survivors. Yeah, okay, and it's there. So obviously I'm right, it survived. So that's the kind of thing you have to face. And the evidence is saying, don't fall for that. Don't fall for that. The evidence we actually have, by the way, this is half of the talk that I was going to give and then take questions. So I don't know, somehow I seem to talk a long time, or take a long time to say a few simple things. But I will remain around for some individual questions, but some of you have roasts in the oven, people coming over and things like that. So I'd like to thank the Denver Creation Society for inviting me, Denver Society of Creation, for inviting me to come and for the joy of being a part of the fellowship.
Yeah, thank you. We usually